Okay, good morning. Welcome, FinOpsers. Thank you for coming to Austin, Texas on this glorious June Monday. I'd like you to put your hands together, please, and welcome Mr. Dan Berg from DataDog for our first talk for the day. Over to you, Dan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. As Ben told you, my name is Dan, and today I'm going to be talking about And Then There Was FinOps, creating and scaling your FinOps practice. Actually, are we able to close the doors a little bit? Yeah, thank you. Welcome to my talk. So, going to go over a little bit of the agenda, what I'm going to be covering today. First, who I am, and also why you should be listening to me a little bit. Then I'm going to dive more into a philosophical overview, so kind of how I think about FinOps, and if you are starting a new practice at a company, I'm kind of diving into my experience. I joined the company DataDog about 4 years ago as the first cloud practitioner, related to cost. And so I'm going to share kind of what I did to get there philosophically, and then a little less conversation, a little more action, kind of the actions that you can take kind of at the beginning to build out that practice. And then at the end, I'm going to touch a little bit about growing out your team. So if you are that single person, you're trying to grow out your team, or you're thinking about a career right now, or you're a company that wants to build out this practice, a little bit more about my thoughts on career. So first, it says DataDog. I actually left DataDog. This is the news. I left DataDog at the 3rd of this month. I'm going to be starting a new job at a company called Full Story at the end of the month on the 28th. So I'm a free agent right now. I'm going to tell you in this talk kind of what I learned, like I said, over the past 4 years at DataDog, being the first hire, growing out the practice, helping grow out the team, doing all that kind of stuff, and then kind of what I'm thinking about going into the new role and basically doing the same thing again is what I plan to do. Some fun facts about me. I did not study tech at all. I actually graduated with a degree in English, creative writing. I actually have 2 full-length plays that were introduced both here and in China, which is weird to say. I graduated college with an English degree, and then of course I went into retail because that's sometimes what you do. And then I managed to escape that into the world of tech journalism. So I worked at a couple of organizations, first Laptop Magazine, then The Verge. I didn't really want to be writing about tech. I wanted to be working in tech. That was kind of my goal all along. So I found an in working with data centers and asset management. And that's how I kind of discovered the world of FinOps. Because I was dealing with data centers, I was dealing with servers, vendors, the money stuff, and then they were starting to grow their cloud usage, and I was able to apply my knowledge there to the cloud. And so after that job, the opportunity at DataDog kind of came up, and it was exactly what I wanted to be doing, and I didn't know that it was called FinOps at the time. And so I joined DataDog, and really over the course of 4 years, I discovered the FinOps Foundation, I started fleshing out the practice, I started building the team, and got it to where it is today, which is in a pretty good place, which is why I feel comfortable kind of leaving it and going somewhere else. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, so like I said, I have this big circuitous journey to where I am in FinOps. If anybody wants to talk careers, I'm totally happy to do that. Next, there we go. So first I'm going to talk about kind of what is FinOps as I see it? And there's 2 main things that I kind of think about when I think about FinOps. The first is decreasing the money feedback loop. So when an engineer makes a change, they deploy some code or something, oftentimes, or if there's something wrong, they're going to know it immediately. There's an availability issue, there's going to be some sort of downtime, some sort of speed issue. But when it comes to money, that feedback loop can be so much longer. Sometimes 45 days, right? Because if you're getting a bill in the middle of the next month, then there's the finance department looking at it and then asking engineers what's happening. It's just so long. And so really the very first goal that I see when I'm coming into an organization is how long is the feedback loop for money, and how can I shorten that? And then the second thing is decreasing the price. And when it comes to price, this sounds really basic, but really all it is price is rate times usage. That's it. And so when it comes to levers that you are able to pull, you can either pull the rate or the usage level. That's it. And so kind of categorizing things in that way. And also when it comes to actually doing the work for reducing these 2 things, the rate is something that I like to think about as a centralized basis. So you don't want each team like negotiating their own contracts, right? You want to do that in a centralized way. Same with purchasing reservations, just do that in a centralized way. But usage, so how applications are using the cloud, should be done decentralized. And so it's up to the FinOps group to really enable those engineering teams or enable people to decrease the usage and track it and do all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I think about FinOps. In terms of if you're joining a company as the initial hire, this is the kind of phases that I like to think about, and these are not step by step, so you don't complete one and then go on to the next. They often will run concurrently. But in the beginning, and I'm going to touch on each of these in detail as soon as this slide is over, but you get there and you listen and observe, just like any new job that you join. Next is visibility. You just got to make sure that people can see what they are spending. That is like number one. Reducing the rates, that should be also at the very beginning going on, so that's renegotiation if possible, reservations, all of those sort of things. After that, you should start thinking bigger picture, like what do you want this function to look like? If it was more than one person, more than just you, what would you be able to do? Next is automate as much as you can and grow your team. And after that, I mean, at phase 6, I put tackle large programs. Maybe you can do that earlier, but that's kind of like once you have a team and a function, you're able to really think about these larger, like cross-functional programs and how you're going to implement those. All right, so you've joined a new company. Just like any new company, you should listen and kind of get a feel for what's going on. And when you join as a solo FinOps practitioner, it can be difficult, or at least in my experience it was. When I joined DataDog, I was reporting directly to the CTO and co-founder. So like, it was great to have access to the CTO and co-founder, but also I had to really find my way in terms of who I should connect with, who I should talk to, getting in with all the engineering and meeting the right people and forming those relationships. It's kind of like a free agent there. And it's possible that if you are the first person, you will be acting kind of as a free agent, even if you are part of a different engineering team. And so what you want to learn is kind of what is their existing tagging strategy, and if there's room for improvement, like do you have visibility into what the spend is? If not, that is number one. You want to figure that out. Next is like, do teams have visibility into that spend? Can they see it? What does that visibility look like? Can you improve it? Those kind of things. Also, if they hired you, there's probably a reason that they hired you. Like, what are their goals for you in this role, both spoken and unspoken? And when you speak to different teams, they might have different opinions or thoughts about it. So the person that hired you, the manager, might have a different opinion than finance or engineering or whoever you talk to. So find out what all those are. You're going to also have to make some decisions or sell some decisions about whether to build versus buy for a lot of these tools. Because sometimes you have the resources to build stuff. Sometimes it makes sense to go with a third-party company for functions that you want. But I mean, the key is to figure out what functions you want first and then figure out the tool after that. Next, who are your stakeholders? Like, who do you need to convince when you want to get stuff done? And lastly, too, who might be your executive sponsor? When you're running these like bigger programs that are like across different teams, you're going to want to have executive buy-in. So who actually has skin in the game when it comes to these decisions and who are aligned with your vision in terms of the cost stuff? Next, in terms of visibility, I kind of see visibility in two different stages. Visibility level 1 is just the basic, right? So how much are teams spending if your organization is grouped into teams, which I assume it is. Also, how much do applications cost? So teams build applications. Those applications should have costs. Can they see those costs? That's kind of the basic level 1. You want to make sure everybody knows kind of what they're spending. Visibility level 2, I like to think of as efficiency. And developing sort of like KPIs or key performance indicators for each of these applications. So when I'm talking about that, at DataDog, we had an application that ingested logs, right? Just a single application. All it did was ingest logs. So we took the cost of that application and compared it against number of logs ingested. Simple as that, right? And so that gives you the efficiency of that single application, and you can track that over time. A lot of people will try to figure out a single KPI for their entire business. Maybe your business can do that. I would say most businesses cannot. And what you're going to want to try to do is break it down into smaller applications and see what those applications should scale against, and then track its efficiency over time. Next is going to be just visibility into an organization like finance, right? So I'm speaking from the perspective of the engineering org, and we enabled finance. So like, do they have the visibility that they need? If they're doing forecasts, are they forecasting based on historical data? Or is there anything that they could get from like the roadmap of engineering that might enable them to make a better forecast? If they're splicing costs into like cost of goods sold and not, so like what goes to paying customers and what is R&D, like how are they getting that data? Can you improve that data? All of those sort of things are the other visibility things that you should be looking at. Next, as I mentioned, rates. In terms of reservation purchased, we ended up on a really regular cadence. So it took us about, I would say, 1.5 years to get there, but we ended up with a weekly practice of analysis and then purchasing of reservations, which is quite frequent, but we did more frequent, smaller purchases. And we had goals around what we wanted our on-demand spend to be. So it mattered less about like reservation coverage, and more we would just calculate, okay, what % of our total compute spend is on demand, and like, is that above 5%? Okay, make more purchases. If it's below, okay, we have a little bit of room to breathe. And then we would do that on a weekly basis, which is scary at first, but if you're doing 3-year purchases, once you get to that 3-year point, you regularly have expirations. And so it's really great to kind of like mitigate that risk with a long enough timeline. And if you're just starting from scratch, do a combination of 1 year and 3 years, so you have those cliffs, and then eventually can move to all 3 years. And once you have that, it's really great. So figuring out what that strategy is, figuring out who needs to say yes every time you make a purchase, because it might be a lot of people in the beginning, and like what data they need. And so, like I said, this took a full year to get them comfortable. And like 1 week they'd be comfortable with one information, the next week they'd have all new questions. And so it takes a while to get there, but think about kind of how you can productize that. And lastly, just join the loop. Like, where are decisions being made in terms of roadmap and business? Is this a change management meeting that you can join? Is there some sort of engineering planning meetings, like for separate parts of the business, that you can kind of be a fly on the wall and listen to? Figure out kind of where all of these conversations are happening, and try to find a way in there. It's really difficult as the single FinOps practitioner, because you're responsible for anything in the business that creates cloud spend, which is everything in the business, basically. And so having to hold that all in your head is next to impossible. But like, if you have a vague, like a high level understanding of everything, that will help enable you, like if you see a cost increase or you see what's going on, to just even know where to go to get those questions answered. And lastly, start thinking big picture. So you should start fleshing out your larger FinOps vision. And I mean, literally, like get a document and start writing this out. What would you be able to do with an additional person? What would you be able to do with 5 people on your team? Maybe you need 10. Whatever that number is for your business, kind of flesh out that vision. And I would also say don't do this alone. So definitely partner with other business units. So finance is going to have opinions about how you can help them. Engineering, I'm sure, will too, because a lot of your data could enable them to make better, faster decisions, and at a deeper level for the business. So partner with them, and that way when you go to get that executive buy-in for this larger team vision, it's not just you pitching it, but you have support from all other parts of the business. And this is really going to be what enables you to grow your practice. Okay, so on to growing your team. In terms of growing your team, I'm going to be talking about 3 main things. The first is kind of like when you should hire people and who you should hire for your team. Next, I'm going to talk about career paths, both for individual practitioners that might be in the room thinking about their own careers and where they want them to go. And also, if you are a single FinOps practitioner, or maybe you have a small team, you're thinking about growing your team, kind of how I think about that. And lastly, sourcing candidates, just very briefly. So I want to share a little bit about the FinOps journey at DataDog and where the size of the company was at various parts on that journey. So like I said, when I first joined, it was just me, I think for like a year and a half or 2 years. So I was able to get initial spend into and visibility in there. I had monthly syncs with the top spending teams. So each month I would meet with them and go over last month's costs, talk about next month's cost. Hopefully there were no surprises. There were still surprises. But yeah, got that process going. Next is figuring out the reservation strategy. That was something that I started at the very beginning. And when that happened, it was just me. With this work right here, it's already getting to be like a full-time job, basically. And so it doesn't leave a lot of time to think about growing the team. So fortunately, we were able to get another person on the team to take over some of the responsibilities. We could really focus on our cost modeling and forecasting, focusing with finance and really getting their model improved. I was able to hand off a lot of the monthly meetings that I had with teams, which was also great for like being able to tackle new work. We have a cost improvement tracking program. So basically, it doesn't always make sense to work on FinOps stuff. Like sometimes roadmap items actually make sense for the business. When that happens, you should have an inventory of what to do when it is time to make sense of it. And so like a centralized tracking program for ideas, initiatives, anybody that has, so that we can track it and engineers can work on priority to see whether it makes sense for their teams or not. So a centralized tracking program was something we were able to kind of launch when there were 3 people. After that point, there was a reorganization, and so we shifted into the wider engineering org. And at that part, we really started to like scale. And it was really great. Actually, the move was good because it enabled us being deeper embedded in engineering. And then we hired a bunch of different people, like improving data for business units, inside Kubernetes, the pod allocation, because they're running their own Kubernetes, wild. And so pod level cost attribution is a big challenge and something that we're still working on, or they are still working on. All right, so the when and how of growing your teams. One of the things that I've noticed, at least from my experience when it comes to FinOps work, as opposed to like traditional engineering work, is like if you have an engineer that has a sprint, they take a ticket, they complete a ticket, that ticket's done, right? In FinOps, what I've found is somebody wants a view of something, they want to see the data a certain way. You spend like a week, 2 weeks putting this together, and then they're like, this is great. I want this all the time. I want this regularly. And so suddenly you have a new recurring task, and that really adds up. And a lot of times that can drive scaling your company, because the 2 types of hires you can have is either you hire somebody to take over one of these processes that you put out and like grow it, bring it to the next level, or you have some sort of functionality on your wish list, like the team vision that you grew, that you want to do, so you hire somebody specifically to tackle that. So those are the 2 kind of ways that I see of like naturally growing your team. In terms of FinOps careers and my thoughts, the best advice that I have to everybody is be a part of engineering. If you're looking for a FinOps job, find out if it's part of engineering and don't take it if it's not. I say this just because like you'll have better access to engineers and being able to get stuff done, and you'll have a better salary. Like it's just great all around. Also, I would say don't reinvent the wheel. When I first got hired at DataDog, I was kind of like I said, reporting directly to the CTO. I was like, what does this mean for my career progression? I had no idea. So I was kind of like looking at things and like trying to build, like maybe I could do this and this. I would say my advice is like, use engineering's career ladder. So the company that you're in probably has an engineering career ladder. Most likely it has like individual contributor and a management track. Just forklift that, just use it for FinOps. I found that that's the easiest way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for any of this. And it's a great way to make a clear career progression, both for yourself and for anybody that you might hire onto your team. Also, make sure people are always learning and growing. This is very easy in FinOps just because it is such a new kind of space. There's a lot of new information, and hopefully you hire somebody that actually understands the opportunity space and is interested in the space, in which case there's a lot of stuff to learn. Also, as soon as you put FinOps in your like LinkedIn profile like title, you'll get a ton of messages from recruiters. My advice too, for just pushing the industry forward, is like ask them what their career bands are, and if they're low, tell them. They'll just be like, yeah, this is low for me. Because that feedback, again, is going to help push all of us forward. So where to find people traditionally, or like I don't know, even like 3 to 5 years ago, when you wanted to find people, you could kind of either pull finance people that were more interested in engineering, or much more rarely, engineering people that were more interested in finance, right? Now there's a bigger pool of people that are like FinOps certified, that actually have some FinOps experience, but just make sure that you are hiring people for this specific role that you defined. I mean, like, if you do find some sort of like FinOps rock star that you just need to bring in, like find something to do with them, that's a different thing. But make sure that the hiring and the growing from the team is natural. It comes from a place of like business needs. So like this project that is a recurring work that suddenly you need somebody to own, or it's a part of the FinOps practice that you want to scale out. So yeah, I would say that even talking to people and hiring them, knowledge of the FinOps Foundation itself, isn't always there, which I don't think is that big of a deal. Like, they don't have to have heard of the FinOps Foundation. It's always good to like tell people like, hey, this thing exists, but it's not a make or break in terms of hiring people, I would say. And yeah, aside from knowledge or skill, an understanding and excitement about this space, I just find super important, just because like it is so new, there's so much information, and there really is opportunity to push the practice forward at individual companies. And if you're able to find somebody that kind of understands and recognizes that, it's going to help you and your role in the company. And that was it. I finished like 5 minutes early. Thank you guys very much.
I have a question. How many cost models you develop? Which of them fail? You never get success in cost model.
How many cost models? Can you repeat that? And actually, there's a mic too.
Means you have developed cost models, right? How many of them you developed for the process? How many of them failed?
How many cost models fade?
No, maybe you developed some of them failed.
The cost models.
Yeah, this one.
Oh, I mean, in terms of cost modeling and forecasting, it's more, I mean, if your visibility is there, what I'm referring to more is kind of like cost modeling is understanding how much applications cost. So if your tagging is there, if you know how much the application that ingests logs costs, you can like model it, you can compare that against the usage and really have that cost model there. That's more what I was referring to. So usually if you have the tagging correct, that is good. And the only thing that might change is like shared costs. If you're not properly attributing those, that you then at a more advanced stage can attribute the shared costs that can be added.
But my question is, how much you implemented in practical, which one is not success?
Which ones have I implemented in terms of the cost model?
Cost model, and which you never went well.
What was your failure percentage rate?
Yeah, the failure percentage rate. I mean, it was more a matter of developing, and like when we saw weaknesses, kind of like filling in those weaknesses. So there weren't anything that I would say outright failed. It was more, we put together a view. We might be told the view isn't useful. You know, they're like, oh yeah, we don't look at our costs this way, so we have to group it some new way. But it's just a matter of iterating on it. And like I said, regular conversations with engineers. So like we met with engineers once a month. And so we had plenty of time to like get that feedback and iterate on things.
Hey, Dan. So after a practitioner is able to disambiguate the complex or the cloud bill, we then start to realize that the availability of the data is delayed. And so in some cases, 48 hours for actual cost or 72 for amortized cost. So you being at DataDog and part of a big APM player, you're probably uniquely positioned to have access and strength internally with the operational metrics. So did you, before leaving DataDog, leverage those metrics to reduce the time delay to start enabling your organization to make near or real-time decisions to compensate for the fact that the CSPs are just not providing that data intraday in a way that can really help us?
Yeah, so
and
yes.
how did you accomplish
And
it?
how do we do that? Yeah, so great question. I would say that majority of the time in my role, we use the delayed data. So we had that 48-hour. DataDog just released a new cost tool. It's in beta right now, and they use the CUR, and they use that billing data too. In terms of using DataDog as a cost tool. I don't know if you noticed, like in the keynote presentation, when it says like what tools people use, DataDog's always on there. And we had individual teams that would use DataDog for that instant feedback. And the DataDog usage was often taking like the number of hosts, multiplying it by like on-demand costs, and like looking at it that way. But the interesting thing about cost is it's always an extrapolation of like usage metrics. So you could use those usage metrics to figure out like what something costs. And for individual engineering groups, sometimes that's enough for decision making, right? Like, because you don't need to know what the post discount is. Like if I buy a reservation, you don't need to know that your costs went down, because you might see the costs go down and be like, oh no, what did we do? And like, so you don't want to have that. So really what you want to show engineers is the pre-discounted costs. And a lot of times that can come from usage metrics. It's just not as complex and robust enough for the business's needs totally.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I wish I had known this 3 years ago. Could you develop more detail on the cost-saving cost tracking program?
Yeah, so this was a new thing that we kind of rolled out. And I mean, it's all tracked. It's very simple on like a Jira Kanban board, right? And so anytime an engineer or a team would come up with an idea of something that could save cost, whether it's like tiny, like just a change, or something that's like a larger architecture thing, we would have a process for ingesting that idea and then measuring that idea. So measuring like effort size, how much cost savings would happen, that sort of stuff. And so in our monthly meetings with teams, going over that with them would be part of this process. And so they would know the metrics of their application in terms of how much they were spending and how much they were costing. So they were enabled to make those decisions being like, okay, we just onboarded a new customer. We gave that customer X number of free things, so our margins are hurting. Let's take this ticket off of this queue, complete it, and do the cost savings. So that's like the larger vision for the team or for the program that we had, that we were able to get the early stages rolled out before I left. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for all the information you've shared. One question that I have is, FinOps may sometimes be thought of as an internal consulting organization, especially we're giving recommendations, we're analyzing stuff, but we are not making the changes, or we're not, like we don't own the financials, and so we're bringing all these teams together. What's a suggestion on how to get more integrated with the engineers and the architecture teams? And you kind of referred that a little bit in your talk, how you were, I think there was a reorg in your organization, but what's your recommendation so that FinOps is an integral part on more the architectural decisions in the next few years?
Yeah, great question. It's good to be a part of engineering. I mean, I know that that's not always the case, but like just being in that org gives you more access to people. Consistent communication. So like I said, we had monthly meetings with teams. If you can go into where decisions are happening, maybe there's like a change management meeting that you can just tack onto. If you're large enough, you might have like meetings with cloud providers on a regular basis to talk about capacity, because their capacity is not limitless. And if that's the case, going into those meetings to understand kind of like what's happening. If your business does OKRs, reading those on a quarterly basis to understand what is on the roadmap for teams is good. So just having those conversations, understanding who to meet, and like reading and listening as much as you can. Yeah.
Good morning. I have a practical question about one of the use cases you talk about in terms of reservations, right? So
yeah.
we are within engineering operations from a FinOps standpoint, but how you manage, right, from a reservation standpoint, how you make those decisions related to exchanges versus unused reservations and application of unused reservations to your cost, right? From our perspective, we are a SaaS provider. So the cost, it has a direct impact to margins, right? So that's, you know, teams are looking at the cost to that level or the after discount cost. So how you make sure how you approach that and how you make it fair across the organization?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Because you see an increase in cost and you're like, okay, is this permanent? Is it not? Like, is it temporary? And I mean, the very first thing we did, at least at DataDog, was we saw that, we found out who did it, and we asked them, right? The first part is just as simple as that, but that takes time. You can't actually act on a weekly basis. And so at that point, we would just try to figure out based on those conversations with them, what their roadmap was. So try to get rid of those surprises. And at a certain point, we were able to like limit the number of surprises that we had. And so we could feel confident in making those purchases. And we also had historical data that like, it would keep increasing anyway. And you could also do a risk analysis where like, okay, if we're underutilized for a bit, how much will that cost us versus not making this reservation? And often cases, it's gonna be cheaper to like be underutilized than it will be to like not make the purchase. And that's what we found. That's what finance needed to see to feel comfortable with it. And that's sort of what we did. I just got like a 1-minute warning too, to let everybody know.
Yeah, so we've got time for one more question.
Okay, thank you. You talk about tagging. How did you reinforce tagging across the organization? Because this has been a challenge for us.
I mean,
making sure that at least they comply to the tagging strategy that you put in place.
Yeah, I mean, my talk was more high level. Tagging is a whole conversation in and of itself. I was very fortunate when I got to DataDog that things were pretty well tagged. I would say around 80%. Although that we left that as soon as like people started migrating to Kubernetes, and also like we were in AWS, then we launched in GCP, and then we launched in Azure. So we were in all three. Each one had their own different tagging thing. For some reason, the tagging structure didn't carry over. So yeah, there's a lot of additional work to do there. But finding out like where tags are applied, and then finding out if there's rules that you could apply to like either send warnings to people if they're mistagged or do anything else like that. It's a lot of like legwork, so there's no getting around it.
Awesome. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming. And let's please express our thanks to Mr. Dan Berg.
Thank you, guys.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.